Brennan Jasper wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, squinting up at the twin suns that blazed like angry spotlights overhead. The air shimmered around him in thick, oily waves. His boots felt like they were melting into the cracked white earth. Somewhere behind him, a low hum grew louder, and he turned to see the source of his current misery descending. It was a ship, shaped like a silver teardrop, smooth and gleaming even in the punishing heat. The vessel settled onto the ground without a sound, dust swirling in lazy spirals around it. A hatch opened, and out stepped Professor Vellix, a creature Brennan had only seen once before, through a thick sheet of glass and under heavy quarantine procedures. Vellix was tall, almost spindly, with skin like polished stone and large, unblinking eyes. It carried a small device in one hand that beeped softly with every step. Brennan adjusted the reflective cloth draped over his shoulders, feeling the fabric stick awkwardly to his skin. "You have arrived, human Brennan," Vellix said, voice flat but not unfriendly. "The parameters are set. Today's experiment commences." Brennan forced a smile. "Yeah, thrilled to be here. Let's get this oven fired up, huh?" Without a word, Vellix pressed a button on the device. Instantly, the temperature around them seemed to leap by another 20 degrees. Brennan winced as the air grew heavier, more aggressive against his lungs. His water bottle, left half open by his feet, hissed quietly as the liquid inside began to steam. "You will construct a survival structure," Vellix said. "Materials provided are minimal. Observations will be made." A small drone zipped from the ship and dropped a thin bundle at Brennan's feet. He knelt and peeled it open. A roll of crinkled tin foil, a few broken mirror shards, and a pair of rusted metal rods. "You've got to be kidding me," Brennan muttered. Vellix tilted its head. "Is there a problem?" Brennan stood, shielding his eyes. "Nope, no problem, just wondering where you parked the air conditioner." Vellix recorded something on the device without responding. Brennan got to work. The ground was too hot to kneel on for long, so he danced awkwardly from foot to foot as he laid out the tin foil. His first attempt at a frame collapsed after barely a minute, the rods sinking into the softened ground. He cursed under his breath and tried again, this time wedging the rods into a patch of cracked earth where a few stubborn rocks jutted out. The sun, both of them, hammered down harder. Brennan's shirt was soaked through, and his arms were starting to redden in angry splotches. He knew he had maybe 30 minutes before heat exhaustion hit full force. "I need more support," Brennan said aloud, half to himself, half to the silent alien observer. He dug around in his pockets and came up with a handful of bent nails and a few lengths of string. He'd scavenged them earlier from a broken storage crate, just in case. He drove the nails into the ground around the rods and tied the string tight, creating a primitive but stable frame. "Human ingenuity is fascinating," Vellix observed. "Yeah, well, I'd rather be fascinating somewhere with ice cream," Brennan grunted. He draped the tin foil across the frame, shiny side out, then carefully balanced the mirror shards against the outer edges to reflect as much sunlight as possible away from the shelter. It was crude, ugly, and barely standing, but when Brennan crawled underneath, he immediately felt a difference. The reflected heat lessened just enough to stop the burning sensation on his skin. Vellix approached, scanning the structure. Shelter integrity, low. Efficiency, marginal. Survival probability increased by 17%. 17%, Brennan scoffed. "Come on, that's gotta be worth at least 20. Vellix made no comment, instead adjusting something on its device. The suns overhead pulsed brighter. Brennan groaned. "You're turning it up." He said, voice cracking. "Testing limits," Vellix replied. The ground beneath the shelter creaked ominously as the heat intensified. Brennan felt the foil start to sag. He scrambled out, grabbing the mirror shards and repositioning them to create better angles. His fingers burned against the glass, and he had to wrap them in the shredded remains of his shirt to keep working. "Request. Additional materials," he said through gritted teeth. "Denied," Vellix said calmly. Brennan eyed the ship. It gleamed invitingly, probably air-conditioned inside. He shook his head and returned to work. He reinforced the frame by twisting the foil into cords and braiding them along the rods, giving the structure a little more resilience. Minutes dragged by. Brennan's vision blurred at the edges. He staggered, catching himself on one knee. His breathing turned shallow. He knew the sign's heatstroke was coming fast. Test subject nearing failure, Vellix noted. Brennan forced himself upright. Not done yet. He spotted a pile of discarded metallic tubing near the landing site, probably waste material from the ship's maintenance. Without asking permission, he stumbled toward it, grabbing a few pieces and dragging them back to his shelter. He jammed them into the ground at awkward angles, creating a makeshift exoskeleton around the foil. "You are using unauthorized materials," Vellix said. "Survival," Brennan rasped, "means using what you have." Vellix hesitated. Its device beeped uncertainly, as if it didn't know whether to penalize or reward the behavior. Brennan collapsed under the improved shelter, heart hammering against his ribs. The temperature inside was still brutal but survivable. Barely. "Test Phase 1 complete," Vellix announced. Brennan could barely lift his hand in a weak thumbs up. A small medical drone zipped from the ship, scanning Brennan's vitals. It sprayed a cool mist over his face and arms, enough to drop his core temperature slightly. He would need fluids, rest, and probably Enroman 4, but he was stable for now. Vellix studied him for a long moment. "Human resilience, unexpectedly high," it said. Brennan closed his eyes, letting the mist soak into his skin. "You haven't seen anything yet," he mumbled. The suns dipped slightly toward the horizon, the air cooling a fraction. Vellix seemed to consider this a good stopping point, tapping at its device to log the results. Brennan lay still, too exhausted to move, feeling every ache and blister across his body. "Tomorrow," Vellix said, "we will test structural integrity against atmospheric combustion." Brennan groaned. "You know, where I'm from we usually start with a handshake and maybe a coffee." Vellix made no reply, only turned and strode back toward the ship, leaving Brennan alone with his battered shelter and the slowly darkening sky. Brennan woke to a dull ache pounding behind his eyes. His tongue felt like it had been rolled in sand, and every muscle in his body complained when he shifted beneath the flimsy shelter. The night air was thin and dry, offering little relief. Above him, unfamiliar constellations blinked lazily in the dark violet sky. A mechanical whir announced the return of the drone, this time carrying a silver canister that it dropped unceremoniously beside him. Brennan struggled upright, blinking hard to clear his vision. The canister hissed open, releasing a puff of chilled vapor. He grabbed it with shaky hands and gulped the cold, faintly sweet liquid inside. "You will regain functional capacity in approximately 26 minutes, Vellix said, appearing without warning at the edge of the shelter. Brennan wiped his mouth, breathing easier already. "Good morning to you too." "Morning is a subjective interval," Vellix replied. Brennan squinted at the alien, its stony features unreadable even in the softer light. His skin was hot to the touch, and he could feel the aftereffects of heat exhaustion still lingering. But he was alive. "You said something about combustion yesterday," Brennan said. "Atmospheric combustion," Vellix corrected. "Simulated conditions will replicate spontaneous ignition zones frequently encountered near volatile exoplanetary cores." Brennan stared. "You're going to light the air on fire." "In a controlled radius," Vellix confirmed. "Your shelter's effectiveness under such conditions must be evaluated." Brennan let out a low whistle. "And here I thought surviving 2 suns was impressive." Vellix stepped closer, observing the reinforced shelter. "Your modifications have been cataloged. Unauthorized resources are now classified as adaptive usage." "Glad to know my scavenging skills made the cut," Brennan muttered. The drone returned, this time carrying a thick bundle of unfamiliar material. It dropped it near Vellix, who knelt and began unraveling it. "Secondary challenge parameters include structural augmentation," Vellix explained. "You may utilize thermal-resistant polymers extracted from native flora." Brennan eyed the fibrous sheets skeptically. They looked like giant, dried leaves, veined and brittle. These things don't exactly scream fireproof, Brennan said. Polymer density increases under thermal duress, Vellix said. Efficient if properly applied. Brennan dragged himself to his feet, joints popping in protest. He grabbed one of the sheets and held it up against the shelter's frame, testing its weight. It was surprisingly light, but the edges crumbled if bent too sharply. How long until this combustion thing starts? He asked. 17 minutes. Brennan muttered something under his breath and set to work. He layered the polymer sheets over the foil, using the last of the string to tie them down. Where the sheets overlapped, he secured them with tiny slivers of rock wedged into folds. His fingers trembled from dehydration and fatigue, but he moved quickly, fueled by the looming threat. Vellix watched silently, occasionally recording notes on its device. Brennan caught it tilting its head once or twice, as if puzzled by his methods. "You know," Brennan said between labored breaths, "back home, we usually use things like fire extinguishers." "A primitive solution," Vellix said. "You adapt through improvisation, efficiency through redundancy." "Thanks for the compliment, I think." The polymer sheets rustled as a sudden breeze kicked up. Brennan glanced at the horizon. A faint, reddish shimmer danced across the landscape, growing thicker by the second. "Combustion wave imminent," Vellix announced. Brennan scrambled under the shelter, pulling the last sheet tight across the entrance. The smell of ozone filled the air, sharp and metallic. Without warning, a line of fire raced across the ground, igniting the sparse patches of dry vegetation. The flames leapt higher than Brennan's head, crackling with an intensity that made his skin prickle even through the layers. Inside the shelter, the temperature spiked. Brennan pressed himself flat against the ground, heart hammering. The foil above him shimmered, the polymer sheets hissing as they contracted and toughened. Sweat poured from him in rivulets, soaking his clothes anew. Outside, the firestorm howled, a living thing scratching and clawing at the shelter. Brennan gritted his teeth. "Just another day at the office," he rasped. Minutes dragged by, each second stretching longer than the last. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. Brennan focused on slow, shallow breaths, conserving what little moisture he had left. Finally, the roar of the flames began to fade. The searing heat ebbed slightly, replaced by a heavy, smoky stillness. "You may emerge," Vellix called. Brennan pushed the sheet aside and crawled out, coughing violently. His eyes watered from the smoke and his skin felt raw, but he was intact. The shelter, though blackened and sagging, had held. Vellix stood nearby, scanning the remains with its device. Structural integrity, compromised but sufficient. Human survival probability under combustion exposure, 39% increase. Brennan staggered to his feet, wiping ash from his face. "I want that on a t-shirt," he said hoarsely. Vellix ignored the comment, tapping rapidly on its device. The drone returned, spraying a fine mist over Brennan that cooled his skin and cleared the smoke from his lungs. "You will undergo a recovery period of 4 Earth hours," Vellix said. "Then the next phase will begin." Brennan groaned. "Any chance the next phase involves a nap and a milkshake?" Vellix tilted its head. "Nutritional supplementation will be administered intravenously." "Figures." The drone deposited a small medical kit at Brennan's feet. He knelt and opened it, finding a compact Roman IV setup among other supplies. He grimaced, but set about inserting the needle into the crook of his arm, securing it with a strip of adhesive. The cool fluid began to flow, easing the pounding in his head almost immediately. "You will monitor your vital signs manually," Vellix instructed. Brennan pulled a battered wrist monitor from the kit and strapped it on. The numbers flickered briefly before settling. Heart rate elevated but stabilizing. Blood pressure low but improving. He leaned back against a scorched rock, closing his eyes for a moment. "Why are you doing all this?" he asked quietly. Vellix paused, device hovering midair. "Human adaptability is anomalous among known species. Understanding your thresholds informs interspecies interaction protocols." Brennan cracked one eye open. So basically, you're trying to figure out how much punishment we can take in case we show up uninvited somewhere, correct? Brennan chuckled weakly. Good luck with that, we're stubborn as hell. Vellix seemed to consider this. After a moment, it tapped something into the device. Noted. Hours passed in a sluggish crawl. Brennan dozed fitfully, waking only when the Roman 4 bag emptied. He disconnected it carefully, stowing the kit back in the drone's compartment when it floated by. The second sun dipped below the horizon, leaving only a fading red smear across the sky. The temperature plummeted, the ground releasing its stored heat in ghostly wisps. Vellix approached again, this time carrying a small, cube-shaped object. Next phase, cognitive resilience under environmental distortion, it said. Brennan sat up, muscles stiff. Define distortion. Vellix placed the cube on the ground. It began to hum, emitting a low-frequency vibration that set Brennan's teeth on edge. Simulated gravitational anomalies, Vellix said. Mental acuity will be assessed. Brennan groaned. You're not even going to buy me dinner first, are you? Vellix blinked slowly. Nutritional intake is scheduled post-assessment. The hum deepened. Brennan felt the ground shift subtly beneath him, a sickening sensation like the beginning of a fall that never completed. He clutched the rock behind him to stay upright. Instructions. Navigate designated obstacle course within chronometric limits, Vellix said, gesturing to a series of half-buried markers barely visible in the dark. Brennan staggered to his feet, every step feeling like wading through syrup. You really have a flair for hospitality. The drone zipped ahead, illuminating the course with a soft blue light. Brennan took a deep breath and started forward, the distorted gravity pulling at him unevenly with every step. Behind him, Vellix recorded everything, its expression unreadable as always. Brennan stumbled forward, the ground buckling with every uneven step, as if invisible hands were tugging at his ankles. The blue-lit markers ahead flickered slightly under the pressure of the distortion field, their edges warping and bending in ways that made his stomach churn. This feels like walking on a trampoline filled with pudding, Brennan muttered, gritting his teeth as he lurched toward the first marker. Comparison? Illogical, Vellix said from behind him, the alien's voice as steady as ever. Trampolines and pudding possess disparate elastic properties. Brennan grunted, catching himself against a low boulder as the gravity shifted sideways without warning. It's called a metaphor. Humans use them when things get weird. Noted, Vellix replied, recording the comment with a flick of its device. The obstacle course wasn't long, maybe 30 meters end to end, but every step was a battle. Brennan's legs trembled under the strain. His joints ached from the uneven forces pulling at them. The wrist monitor he still wore beeped a warning, elevated heart rate, early signs of dehydration returning. His earlier recovery was wearing thin faster than he liked. Reaching the halfway point, he paused, pressing a hand to his ribs where a deep cramp was forming. The air tasted metallic, and his vision blurred at the corners. He knew the symptoms: fluid loss, electrolyte imbalance, hypoxia from the low oxygen density. You are permitted to withdraw, Vellix called out. Brennan shook his head, wobbling slightly as he set his jaw. Not a chance. He stumbled toward the next marker, knees buckling under a sudden spike in gravity. He dropped to all fours, panting, and crawled forward, dragging himself along the cracked ground. The blue light danced mockingly ahead of him. Observation: human persistence exceeds rational survival instincts, Vellix noted. Yeah, well, Brennan panted, we didn't make it off our planet by quitting when things got stupid. When he finally reached the final marker, he collapsed flat on his back, chest heaving. The distortion field cut off abruptly with a soft pop, and the world righted itself with a nauseating lurch. Brennan squeezed his eyes shut until the spinning slowed. Vellix approached, stepping lightly over the uneven ground. It scanned Brennan from head to toe. Vital signs: unstable but within recoverable margins, cognitive integrity maintained under duress. Brennan peeled one eye open. Translation, I passed. Affirmative. Brennan laughed weakly. You know, for a species obsessed with survival, you guys sure have a funny way of showing hospitality. Vellix crouched beside him, tapping at its device. Human emotional resilience is among the highest recorded. Physical thresholds, however, remain inefficiently optimized. Brennan coughed, pushing himself upright. His muscles screamed in protest, but he forced them to obey. You should see what we do when there's money involved. Vellix seemed to consider this. Currency-based motivation as a survival incentive. Curious. Brennan waved a hand vaguely. You'd be amazed what people will endure for a bonus. The drone zipped back, dropping a packet of electrolyte-infused gel packs. Brennan tore one open with his teeth, gulping the thick, salty fluid down without hesitation. His hands shook badly, but the rush of minerals steadied him after a few moments. Time crawled by as Brennan sat hunched over, slowly regaining his strength. The twin moons rose overhead, casting a pale silver glow across the scorched landscape. The air cooled to a tolerable chill and the ground ceased its restless twitching. Upcoming analysis requires comparative data, Vellix said after a while. Brennan looked up blearily. Comparative. Other species subjected to identical stressors exhibited total collapse within significantly shorter durations. Let me guess, Brennan said, wiping his mouth. You thought humans would fold too? Negative. Predictions accounted for a marginally higher threshold. Actual results exceeded expectations by 182%. Brennan leaned back on his elbows, staring at the stars. His skin felt tight and raw, his muscles hollowed out from exertion, but somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark burned brighter. You keep trying to figure out what makes us tick, he said, voice rough. But the truth is, half the time we don't even know ourselves. Vellix tilted its head. An illogical species surviving through chaotic adaptation. That's us, Brennan said, chuckling quietly. Masters of barely getting by. He pulled himself fully upright, joints popping. The shelter he had built earlier still stood nearby, battered but defiant. The polymer sheets had hardened into a brittle shell under the firestorm, giving it an almost fossilized look. You gonna need that thing for your reports? Brennan asked, nodding toward the shelter. Documentation completed. Structure may be repurposed or discarded. Brennan scratched his chin thoughtfully. Might make a decent barbecue pit. Vellix blinked slowly, clearly uncertain whether he was serious. By the time the first hints of dawn tinged the sky pale orange, Brennan had dismantled the shelter. He stacked the usable materials neatly. Rods, mirror shards, scraps of foil. His hands were blistered and blackened at the edges, but he worked methodically, conserving energy. Vellix observed silently, recording each movement. You don't get it, do you? Brennan said finally, tossing the last rod onto the pile. It's not just about surviving. It's about making something out of the mess afterward. Post-survival reconstruction behavior, Vellix noted. Brennan shrugged. You could call it that. I call it not wasting a good disaster. The drone floated closer, opening a small compartment. Inside was a folded uniform, clean and sealed in a sterile pouch. Brennan grabbed it gratefully, stripping off his ragged, soot-smeared clothes and changing quickly. The fresh fabric was cool against his damaged skin. Vellix approached, holding out a small, rectangular object. Token of recognition, it said. Brennan took it cautiously. It was a simple metal plaque engraved with alien script and a small emblem resembling a stylized flame surrounded by a shield. What's it say? Brennan asked, turning it over. Survivor class, extreme conditions specialist. Brennan laughed, shaking his head. You guys sure know how to make a guy feel special. He tucked the plaque into his pocket, the weight of it oddly comforting. The ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss, and a ramp extended to the ground. Brennan hesitated at the base, looking back once at the scorched earth, the blackened rocks, the piles of salvaged materials. Hey, Professor, he said, glancing at Vellix. Query? You ever think maybe, Brennan said, squinting into the rising sun. Adaptability isn't about surviving the worst. Maybe it's about laughing afterward. Vellix recorded the statement without comment. Brennan grinned. Something to add to your notes. Without waiting for a response, he trudged up the ramp, every step heavy but steady. The ship's interior was blessedly cool, the air rich with oxygen. As the hatch sealed behind him, Brennan let out a long breath and leaned back against the wall. Home was far away. Comfort was even farther. But for now, he had a metal plaque, a battered body, and the hard-won knowledge that whatever the universe threw at him next, he'd find a way to turn it into a barbecue pit. And that was enough.